My brother looked me dead in the eye at the dinner table and said, "You've never contributed a single thing to this family. You're 34 years old and you still don't understand how the real world works." Then he leaned back in his chair and waited for me to argue. I didn't. I just looked at the lasagna I had brought over, still warm in the baking dish, the one I made from scratch after leaving a 12-hour shift. I looked at my father sitting across from him, nodding slowly. I looked at my sister-in-law cutting food into small pieces for their youngest, while pretending she hadn't heard a word. Then I looked at my brother again and said nothing. He took that as agreement. People like him always do. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the house we were all sitting in, the one with the new roof and the updated furnace and the driveway repaved 2 summers ago, existed in the shape it did entirely because of me. Not because of anything I said. Because of what I had been quietly doing for 6 years while my brother told everyone I was drifting. His name isn't worth giving here. In this story, he's just my brother, the one who inherited the confidence without the competence. The one my father always introduced first at family events, the older son. The one who went into business, who married well, who coached his kids' hockey team on weekends and posted about it on Facebook like community service. The golden one. I was the other one. Steady job, quiet apartment near the Rideau, no wife, no Instagram, 34 years old, electrical engineer, the kind of person who solves problems before other people know they exist. In my family, that was called being invisible. My mother died when I was 26. Aneurysm. No warning, no time to prepare. She was 58 years old, and she made the best tourtière in the province, and she was the only person in that family who knew exactly what I did and chose to say thank you anyway. After she died, my father fell apart in the slow, invisible way that proud men do. He didn't cry much. He just stopped managing things. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter. The line of credit they had used to pay down the mortgage started growing in the wrong direction. He kept buying lottery tickets and calling it retirement planning. My brother visited on holidays and called twice a month. He said things like, "Dad seems okay, and he's tougher than you think," and then drove back to his house in Kanata and didn't think about it again until Christmas. I lived 20 minutes away. I went every Sunday. I noticed the hydro bill going to collections. I noticed the property tax notice from the city of Ottawa marked urgent. I noticed my father eating crackers and canned soup, not because he was on a diet, but because he had forgotten how expensive groceries had gotten and was too proud to say so. So I started handling it. Not loudly. Not in a way where I announced anything or expected gratitude. I set up automatic transfers. I paid the property tax directly through the city portal and listed myself as authorized contact on the account. I covered the hydro, the internet, the home insurance renewal he almost let lapse. When the furnace failed in February, I called a contractor, paid the invoice, and told my father it was covered under a program for homes over a certain age. He didn't question it. People who feel helpless rarely push back on good news. I never told my brother any of this, not because I was building towards something. At the time, I genuinely wasn't. I just didn't trust him to handle the information responsibly. And I knew that if he found out, he would either try to take over or dismiss it entirely, and either way my father would end up worse off. So I kept records instead. Old habit. Engineer's document, because assumptions eventually become problems. For 6 years I transferred, paid, managed and maintained. The property on the house stabilized. The line of credit got paid down in chunks. There were months it was tight. Months I skipped things I wanted. Months I told myself I'd figure out later. But the house stayed standing and my father never went to sleep worrying about losing it, and that felt like enough. Then my brother's business started struggling. He ran a renovation contracting company, mostly residential, some commercial. For a while it did well enough that he bought a second truck and hired 4 employees and talked about expansion. Then supply chains got bad, then material costs went up, then 2 clients disputed invoices and stopped paying, and suddenly his cash flow was bleeding in ways he hadn't anticipated and wouldn't admit. The first sign was when he started calling my father more, not the twice-a-month check-ins, real calls, long ones. I found out later, because my father mentioned it casually one Sunday. "Your brother's been going through a rough patch," the way parents do when they're trying to seem neutral while clearly worried. I asked what kind of rough patch. My father changed the subject. 3 weeks later, my brother showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Thursday evening. He stood in the hallway in his work jacket with his hands in his pockets and said he needed to talk. I let him in. I made coffee. He sat at my kitchen table and spent 20 minutes explaining his cash flow situation in the careful, roundabout way people use when they're about to ask for something. Then he asked if I could lend him $40,000. I'm going to be honest. In the moment, I almost said yes, not because I had $40,000 sitting around. I didn't, not liquid, but because the instinct was still there. The one my mother had somehow built into me before she left. The one that said family first and figure out the rest later. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the way he said it. Not asking exactly. More like informing me of what I was going to do. Like the decision was already made and I just needed to confirm it. I need you to come through here, he said. You don't have a mortgage, you don't have kids. You've got no real expenses. This is a family situation. No real expenses. 6 years of holding his father's house together, and he didn't know I had expenses I told him I'd think about. He left without finishing his coffee. That night I lay awake for a long time staring at the water stain on my bedroom ceiling that I kept meaning to fix. The dryer in my building ran late on Thursdays and I could feel the faint vibration through the floor. I thought about what my brother had said, about no real expenses, about this being a family situation. Then I opened my laptop and looked at 6 years of transfers, organized by date, category, amount, property tax, utility arrears, insurance premiums, emergency repairs, the line of credit payments. The total was not a small number. I hadn't built those records for this, but looking at them that night, I started to understand they might matter eventually. I told my brother no 2 days later, by text, because I knew a phone call would become an argument, and I didn't have the energy. He didn't respond for 4 days. Then he called my father. I found out what happened in that call gradually, through the specific silence my father used when he was uncomfortable and trying not to show it. Over the following weeks, my brother apparently reframed the whole situation. He told my father that I had money I was refusing to share, that I was being selfish, that in a family crisis, people who could help had an obligation to help. He also, I learned later, told my father that he was looking into whether my father's house could be used as collateral for a business loan. My father, who didn't understand the details of his own finances nearly as well as I did, apparently said he'd think about it. When I found out, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Sobeys on Baseline Road for 15 minutes without moving. Then I called my father. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of grey October Sunday, where the sky turns the colour of old concrete and the streetlights come on too early. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he was in the kitchen, which meant he was probably eating alone, which still got to me, even after 8 years. Tell me about the conversation you had with my brother, I said. He paused. He's just going through some things. He wants to use your house as collateral. Longer pause. He said it would be temporary. I closed my eyes. Temporary. The word people use when they want you to stop asking questions. Dad, I said, do you understand what happens if his business fails and that loan defaults, you lose the house? He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, he said you have money you're not willing to share, that you could solve this if you wanted to. That sentence sat in the phone line between us like a rock. I didn't defend myself that night. I just said I'd come by on Sunday and we'd talk in person. He said okay. I said good night. I sat in my car a while longer, watching the automatic doors of the Sobeys open and close for no one. The Sunday meeting happened in his kitchen. The same table where we'd eaten 1,000 dinners, the same window looking out at the backyard, where the garden my mother used to keep had been replaced by grass, because neither of them could manage it after she was gone. My father sat with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and looked at me the way he did when he knew a conversation was going to be difficult. My brother arrived 20 minutes late. He came in like he was doing everyone a favor, jacket unzipped, keys still in his hand. He sat down and before I could say anything, he said, I'm glad we're doing this. Dad needs to understand we both want what's best for him. I looked at him for a moment. Then I put the folder on the table. It was a plain manila folder, the kind you get at the Staples for about $2. Inside it were printed summaries, 6 years of financial records, every transfer, every payment, every utility bill, every tax receipt, organized chronologically and cross-referenced to the property address. Before we talk about what's best for him, I said, I want him to understand what's already been done. My brother frowned. What is that? I told him to read it. He didn't read it. He looked at the top sheet, looked at me, and said, what is this supposed to prove? My father read it. He sat there at his kitchen table in his house in Nepean that he had lived in for 31 years, and he went through those pages slowly, and I watched his face do something complicated that I had no language for. Not quite shame, not quite surprise. Something in between, something that looked like a man seeing clearly for the first time in a long time. This was you, he said. Not a question. Yes. All of this, yes. My brother leaned forward. Okay, so you helped out some. That doesn't change the fact that right now the family needs. The property tax arrears from 2019, I said, were $2,200. I paid them in October of that year, 10 days before the city would have registered a lien. If a lien had been registered and not resolved, it would have complicated any future financing significantly, including any attempt to use this property as collateral. My brother went quiet. My father looked up from the folder. I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad, I continued. I'm saying it because my brother is proposing to put this house at risk to secure a loan for a business that is currently struggling. And before anyone agrees to that, I want everyone at this table to understand what it took to keep this house. My brother said, "This is between me and Dad. You made it include me when you told him I was hoarding money." The kitchen was very quiet after that. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. My father looked down at the folder again. What happened next didn't happen in one dramatic moment. That's not how things actually work, even though stories usually pretend otherwise. What happened was that my father asked my brother to leave. He said it politely, the way he handled uncomfortable things, a quiet voice and a flat expression that meant the conversation was over. My brother tried to argue. My father said, "I need to think." My brother left. Not quietly, the screen door hit its frame harder than it needed to, but he left. My father and I sat in the kitchen for a long time without saying much. He made more tea. He looked out the window. At one point he said, "I didn't know." I told him I hadn't wanted him to worry. He said, "That's not your job." I told him it sort of was. That he was my father and the house was still standing, and that was the part that mattered to me. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Your brother told me you were just comfortable, that you had no obligations." I know. That was wrong of me to believe. I told him it was okay. He said it wasn't really, but that he appreciated me saying so anyway. We finished our tea and I helped him with a stuck drawer in the kitchen that had been bothering him for weeks, and then I drove home on the 417 through the grey October evening and sat with the strange, exhausted feeling of a thing finally being known. The following weeks were quieter than I expected. My brother called me once, not to apologize, to tell me I had embarrassed him in front of our father. I said I understood why he felt that way, and told him I hoped his business situation improved. He hung up. I had expected more confrontation. Instead, there was mostly absence. My brother stopped bringing up the collateral idea. My father started including me in conversations about the house the way he hadn't before, as if the folder had reoriented something in how he understood the situation. He asked my opinion on things. He said thank you more. I started looking at my own finances more clearly. 6 years of covering another household had left my savings thinner than they should have been at 34. I had money, not a lot that felt comfortable, and I had been deferring things, a better apartment, RSP contributions, the trip to Portugal I had been rescheduling for 3 years. I started a proper financial plan for the first time, not the kind I did for myself in my head, but an actual document with a timeline and targets. It was strange how good it felt to be building something entirely for myself. Around that same time I got a message from my nephew. He was 8 years old, my brother's middle kid, the one who liked dinosaurs, and asked me questions about how electricity worked every time I came over. He didn't say much in the message. His parents didn't let him have his own device. He used his mother's account. He just said, "Uncle, are you coming to Thanksgiving?" That message sat with me for a day. I thought about what I wanted, not what I owed anyone, what I actually wanted. I wanted to see the kid. I wanted to eat a decent meal with people who were related to me. I did not want to sit across a table from my brother, pretending the last 2 months hadn't happened while my father tried to hold the room together through politeness alone. I replied that I would come for dessert, and I did. I showed up with a butter tart pie from a bakery on Bank Street and sat in my brother's house for an hour and a half. My brother was civil in the flat, careful way of someone who has decided that open hostility costs more than it's worth. My sister-in-law asked about my work. My nephew showed me a model he had been building, a Triceratops, and explained in great detail why Triceratops was actually more interesting than T-Rex, and I listened to all of it. When I left, my father walked me to my car. It was cold, the first real cold of the season, the kind that makes your breath visible and reminds you winter is actually coming. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully interpret. "He won't ask you for money again," he said. I told him that was between them. "I know. I wanted you to know I said something." I nodded. We stood there for a moment in the cold driveway. Then he said, "Your mother knew about what you were doing. She told me once, toward the end, that you were the one who made sure things stayed together without needing anyone to notice." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I didn't say anything. "I understand now," he said. He went back inside. I sat in my car for a while before starting the engine. The rest of that fall moved the way things do when a crisis deflates instead of exploding. My brother's business went through a restructuring. He let 2 employees go and pulled back from the commercial contracts, and focused on smaller residential jobs, the kind with better margins and less financial risk. I found this out through my father, not through my brother directly. But eventually, in December, my brother sent me a message. It was not a long message. It said, I heard you've been keeping the lights on at Dad's for years. I didn't know that. I should have known. That's something I need to sit with. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to the report I had been writing. I didn't respond that day. Not because I was angry. I wasn't, not really, more tired of the whole thing than angry. But because I had spent a long time in that family responding when it was expected of me, and I had decided, sometime around that October Sunday in the parking lot at Sobeys, that I was allowed to respond on my own timeline. I wrote back 3 days later. I said I appreciated him saying so, and that I hoped the business stabilized, and that I was glad the house was still in good shape. He wrote back one word: thanks. It wasn't forgiveness, really. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something honest, which is more than I had expected. I bought an RSP in January for the first time in 4 years. I booked the Portugal trip for April. I finally fixed the water stain on my bedroom ceiling on a Saturday afternoon, while a hockey game played on the radio in the other room. Ordinary and quiet, exactly the kind of afternoon I had been putting off for too long. Some nights I still think about my mother, and the way she seemed to understand things about people, without needing them to explain themselves. How she always knew what I was carrying, even when I hadn't said anything out loud. How she used to say that the most reliable people in any family were the ones nobody worried about, which was both a compliment and a warning she was trying to give me before she had the words for it. I've thought about that a lot. About reliability becoming invisibility. About how long I let the two things blur together. Here is what I know now, that I didn't know at 26 when I started covering a mortgage nobody asked me to cover. Care is not the same thing as silence. Showing up without being seen is not the same thing as being valued. And the most important conversation I ever had in my family wasn't the one where I defended myself or proved a point or opened a folder on a kitchen table. It was the one where my father stood in a cold driveway in November and told me my mother had seen me. That was enough. Not everything, not the end of all the complicated history, but enough to breathe differently. Enough to stop spending my life maintaining a structure that didn't know I was holding it up. My brother is figuring things out in his own time. My father calls me on Sundays now, first, without me going over there to initiate it. My nephew wants to do a project together this summer about how solar panels work, and I already said yes. The house in Nepean is still standing. It probably will be for a long time, and for the first time since I was 26 years old. That fact belongs to me the way it was always supposed to.